Welcome, everybody, to our webinar today. Today's a little bit of a different structure of a webinar, and I hope you really enjoy it. We're really honored to have Dr. Natasha Beauvais. Dr. Beauvais is an award-winning family practice doctor who comes to us from Northern Virginia Family Practice, where she has won awards for Top Doc year after year, and in a little while, you're going to see why. She's also the co-founder of a podcast called Living Breathing Medicine. And Living Breathing Medicine is such an appropriate name for that podcast because I think, Dr. Natasha, you are one of those physicians who does live and breathe what you do. It's part of your life, it's part of your profession, and it's more than just a job for you, taking care of patients. And Dr. Beauvais is going to share with us some work that she's been doing on insight building and how we can get out of our own way in order to improve our health and change our behavior. So this being the start of 2023 and our new sort of webinars for the year, it's a perfectly appropriate topic. So Dr. Beauvais, welcome, and please share with us a little introduction about what you're going to talk about.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dara. I'm really happy to talk to you. I'm always happy to talk to you guys. I'm from New Hampshire, so I feel like I'm kind of from your neck of the woods, and I'm always kind of yearning for a little bit of Boston. So I'll be glad to get it this way on this webinar. I'm going to talk about some work that I've been doing personally in my own personal and professional life, and that we as a medical practice are learning to do ourselves with each other and with all of our staff. But the work comes from Boston. It's from two of my favorite professors from the Harvard School of Education. Well, actually, probably 6 professors, but the main authors of this book were Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, who wrote a book called An Everyone Culture. And I'm going to talk about the work that they've been doing in this book and in another book called Immunity to Change. And basically, the work is helping all of us see how we trip ourselves up. You know, how do we have a belief about something that we're committed to, some belief, and it may be very, very, very true, and how something positive and true can kind of keep us from progressing in our own personal lives and in our work, and how we use that also with patients to help with behavior change. So it's insight building that if a person wants to learn how to lose weight or wants to learn how to be more active or drink less alcohol, this is a very different approach to building insights about what has been keeping them from getting there all along.
It's so perfect because I think for so many of us, and I'm including myself, we know what we're supposed to do. We don't really need someone to tell us that we should be exercising more or eating more healthy. It's just those barriers that run so deep. How do we change those so that we can optimize our health?
Yeah. So this work, I'll just explain a little bit about the basic tenets of the work. And so number one, there's a continuum of how complexly we consider a problem, and that we can grow in our complexity of understanding a problem, even a problem in our own heads. That's number one. We're all capable of change, and we're capable of change all the way through our lives into our very last decades. And we yearn for change and growth. So that's number one. And then number two, something that we are really committed to for a good reason, perhaps unconsciously, can be the thing that, unbeknownst to us, prevents us from making the other change that we would like to make. So to bring this personal quickly, something I was working on, for example, in my own work was I was wanting to learn as a medical practice leader to be a better communicator with my staff. And for years I had in mind what that would look like. I had in mind that I'd be sending weekly emails and being different in my communications in meetings. And for some reason, those ideas, which were good ideas, just stayed in my head year after year and never manifested themselves. And I started to do this work and insight building about how I could be a better communicator. And at first, I started realizing, okay, well, I'm really committed to seeing patients, and I'm committed to spending my time first on patient care, and that's preventing me from spending time doing the communication that I'm talking about. That was one reason. And another thing that I was committed to was this idea that it had to be really a good communication. You know, I couldn't just have any communication going out. I had to have something of high quality. And maybe even the idea that I had to do it week after week. You know, if I started, I could never stop. And so I began to realize that I was committed to a bunch of good things. I was committed to seeing my patients, number one. So I would have to change a little bit of my time around if I were going to operate differently. But I was also committed, kind of without making it overt, I was committed to providing something of excellence. I was committed to something with a lot of regularity. And so on my first pass through this work, I thought, okay, this is what's preventing me from doing it. I'm overcommitted to being a great clinical doctor, and I'm overcommitted to being, you know, I've kind of have a bigger idea about what this has to be than what it really needs to be. And so in some ways that's helpful, because I think just in terms of a scheduling, in terms of a level of mental thought, I can say, well, yes, if I'm seeing patients every afternoon and I'm busy until 6, it's going to be hard for me to make a change. So that's useful on a sort of surface level. And then I went through the work again and again and again. And actually, it took me about 5 times of going through this pattern and ultimately doing it with some staff members that I was also working with. And then I began to realize, as the question changed in my mind, that in fact, I was committed to something different. I was committed to an idea of not overwhelming people and not being domineering of my staff, and, you know, not being that kind of out and front and visible leader. And although it took quite a while to get there, that to me felt like a very helpful aha moment. Like, oh, in fact, if I go out and do the leadership that I want to do, I will somehow be a part of a definition of myself that I wouldn't want. You know, I wouldn't want to be too overwhelming to other people. And so I'm not sure if I'm able to communicate this well, but the hopeful point in anyone's process is that we can all realize that there's something that is unconsciously getting in our way. And if we can name that thing and see it and have an aha moment, a kind of like, oh no, really? That's what's getting in my own way kind of moment. Then we can work on that and get around it to do better or to do differently.
Yeah, no, is it kind of like we all have excuses? I mean, this is a fancy way of saying, you know, look past I can't exercise because I'm so busy cleaning my house, or I can't eat healthy because my son doesn't like to eat salad, so I've got to make hot dogs and French fries tonight, therefore I'm going to eat that. Like, is it sort of about we're all well-intentioned, but going past that to say, is that really the reason that you can't eat a salad? Because you got to make hot dogs and French fries for your son? Is there another way to reframe the question, reframe the problem, and therefore reframe the solution? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, because there's maybe 5 different levels or 2 different levels of that commitment to making the less healthy food for your son. You know, and at first maybe it's like, I'm too busy, or an exterior thing like my son won't like it. But then maybe it goes to another degree of oh, I haven't seen my son in a long time and I don't want a conflict with my son. And therefore I'm committed to not having a conflict with my son. I'm committed to having a good maternal son relationship. And in my mind, if I have a easy dinner and there's something he doesn't argue about, then I'm having a good relationship. But ultimately, I want to be introducing him to a broad variety of foods and nutrition and tools that are going to keep him healthy for the next 70 years. And oh, I can see that I'm kind of getting in my way of that goal by avoiding conflict or avoiding taking the time it would take to introduce new foods. So we might have a few layers of insight building there. Like one is a practical, technical way. And then if we're able to use this method a little bit more introspectively, which takes some time and it takes some work, we may be able to get to something harder to see.
Yes.
So I love the way that you frame that. And what I think of is that identity piece. And I'm not sure if this is where you were going with that, but I think it's interesting how Dara and I come at this, the same topic and hear different things, which is also the layer of complexity, which what you opened with, right? But, I think when you're talking about finding the root of the problem, the question is understanding those whys, right? So how do I get from not being a healthy eater to being a healthy eater, and how we make that kind of an iterative process with identity, right? And I think understanding what drives our identity, right? So, maybe the gym analogy is slightly easier than the healthy eating, just because that's seems like much more complex, right? But I have to identify myself with somebody who wants to exercise, right? And how do I go from a non-exercising person to somebody that's an avid exerciser? Well, tied up in all those steps, right, is me actually seeing myself, right, as somebody that goes through those motions, right? So it seems like the layers of questions you're asking, Natasha, are kind of driving thought about who I am and why I'm subconsciously making the choices I am. Is there a list of questions or a narrative that maybe helps us to tease that out a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a process that takes a bit of time to understand. So I when chatting with Dara about this ahead of time, I decided not to just try to demonstrate the model up front, but I'll explain basically the structure of how it works. And maybe we can take it through a sort of a simple model with either of those examples, because they're both perfect examples of great things to be using insight building for. So the first thing is to name something that you want to get better at. And it's very important to name it in the structure of, I'd like to get better at blank. And the goal is not to have an outcome. It's not to say, I want to lose 10 pounds. It's to say, I want to get better at eating 2 vegetables with every meal, or something like that, whatever the choice is that you make. And the goal is just improvement. It's not perfection, right? All we're doing is getting better. So that's number one. So number one is we define for ourselves, and you can do this at home. You can, take notes for your own self in your mind and just say, I'd like to get better at something. And my recommendation would be that the smaller the aim, the easier it is to kind of get your arms around this structure as a way of understanding it. So it might be, instead of I'd like to get better at losing weight, it's I'd like to get better at
Not eating popcorn in front of the TV after dinner.
Okay, sure. I'd like to get better at selecting my after dinner snack, or I'd like to get better at stopping eating after 8 or something, whatever you're going to do. And then there are going to be kind of 4 basic columns, or kind of 4.5 basic columns about how to structure that. So I'd like to get better at not eating. I'd like to get, I guess how I would reframe that is in a positive. We want to have it in an affirmative goal. So what would you like to get better at in this theoretical model, Dara?
Okay.
Instead of not eating popcorn, I'd like to get better at something affirmative.
At recognizing when I'm full and not eating anymore.
Sure. Okay. And so, and to make it discreet, I might even say after dinner.
After dinner, great.
So I'd like to get better at recognizing when I'm full and stopping eating when I'm full after dinner.
Good.
And so that's something that's stated in the affirmative. It's something that is, it is dependent on you. You're working on your own improvement. It's not an exterior person. You're not saying, I'd like to get better at I don't know, something about my spouse, or I'd like to get better at something about some outcome, but it's like it's an activity that you're going to improve in yourself that's related to you. And so the second column, or the second list of questions, is what am I doing that's getting in the way of that? Or what am I not doing that's getting in the way of it? And what's critical here is to think about it's something that's getting in the way. So let's say about the popcorn example, I'm eating after dinner. What am I doing that's getting in the way of me being aware of when I'm full?
Yes, okay. This is a great one. And in fact, I've had this conversation probably 3 times in the last week with patients of mine. When I go to the grocery store, I'm buying popcorn or I'm buying ice cream that I really like. And it's there in the freezer or in the cupboard.
Perfect. That's it.
Okay.
So one thing that I'm doing that's getting in the way is I'm buying the snack that I wish I weren't eating.
Yeah.
And then what's another thing that I'm doing that's getting in the way?
Okay.
Well, what am I doing while I'm eating the snack after dinner?
I'm watching TV, and so it's this sort of habit where every time I sit down from the TV, I just have to have something to eat.
Yeah, so it's not, and there's no criticism listing in this column. It's just like what you're doing or not doing. I'm watching TV while I'm eating.
Yeah, okay.
And then let's think about things that you are not doing that are getting in the way of being aware that you're full.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not taking a deep breath and reflecting.
Yeah, I'm not slowing down to try attentively to notice the feeling in my body.
Not being mindful. Yeah, okay. Yes, I would say that would be the big one for most people. It's just mindless. It's this sort of, it's automatic. This is the habit. This is what we do in my house. We sit down and we bring out the snacks.
Mm-hmm.
TV.
Yeah, or maybe other people are also eating, and maybe there's children around who are hungry anyway. I mean, if you're a parent of teenagers, they're not done eating at 8 o'clock. So, maybe I'm not finding other things to have around, or having other things for myself to have around while my teenager does eat popcorn, 4 tablespoons of peanut butter, and 3 pieces of toast after dinner.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah, because people have different needs. So I'm not trying to bring out the pineapple slices I would have loved to have eaten as well, just because I am used to eating the ice cream or whatever the easy thing is that I usually go for, my chips or my popcorn or whatever.
Yes.
So column 2 is what are you doing and not doing that is getting in the way. And then in column 3, we're trying to find things that we are worried about if we were to change those behaviors. So what am I worried about if I don't buy the snack at the grocery store? And it could be a positive thing. So if you didn't buy the popcorn or the ice cream, what would you be worried about?
That I'd want it and I wouldn't have it.
Sure, that would be one thing. So I'd be worried that I'd feel desperate for it or feel in need. Any other ideas, just even in a hypothetical?
Yeah, and my son would be angry that there's no ice cream.
Yeah, sure. I would worry that someone else in the house would be unsatisfied. Sure.
I mean, I like that one because that pulls in the identity, right? Because I do think like mom's job is to keep the house stocked, right? So then am I not doing my job, right? If there's not things
Yes,
there
exactly.
that-
I worry that I would be
people
seen
are,
as
right?
not doing my job as a parent. And you're getting to something that's more and more meaningful. And so the more resonant this column is in this, what we call the worry box, what am I worried about? The more useful the tool will be for each person who's using it. So that's a great one, Allie. I worry that I wouldn't be being a good mom because a good mom keeps the house stocked with food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or on the other side of I'm not taking a moment to really connect with my own feeling in my body, to listen to my satiety. If I did the opposite of that, if I did listen to my satiety, what would I be worried about? Or if I did slow down and just take that time. And I think on the time frame, it's kind of easy. Like I'm supposed to be constantly doing something because there's so much to be done. I have to finish the dishes and organize the homework and put the youngest children to bed. And so if I slow down for myself, blank, what would that be like?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? Because that's maybe where we get in our way with that one, because would it really be a problem if I slowed down and recognized, took a minute for myself, that I'm not being a good mom, or that I'm right? But that's not true, because I think it's easy to concoct a story there that isn't necessarily true. But what's a minute? It's nothing. And
Right.
you're all afraid to take that minute, because what are you going to see? It's like you open the can of worms, and what's in there? What if, I mean, to me, it would perhaps be like, what if I find out I was full and I ate anyway? I'd feel so guilty. I'd feel bad and embarrassed that I actually recognized I was full and I ate a bowl of ice cream anyway. That's not
perfect. I would feel guilty and terrible about myself, or bad about myself is a good one. Or for those people who don't have kids at home, there might be other things that they're attending to. Like I'm supposed to be paying attention to my spouse, or I have to get this next list of things done so I can go to bed on time, or I need to talk to my sister on the phone, whatever. They're good things. Like I need to take care of my other family member or project I have at work. I have to just start working after dinner because there are things I've left undone during the day.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
Fear of guilt. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I wonder how much, embedded in that is this little bit of reward, right? For unpleasant tasks too, right? Because, if you are munching on the popcorn, right, it's almost like, you're either enjoying the popcorn where you're doing something you don't like, right? Or maybe it's symbolic of you finished all these other chores, right? And now you finally got the prize, right? Which is 15 minutes to sit on the couch.
Right.
Your popcorn, watching TV by yourself.
Yeah, I'm taking a class online, and
yeah,
another person in the class was laughing and said, he's a lawyer, and he said, "Oh, I've just been working on this brief all night, and that means eating a lot of Cheetos, because that is how I got through law school, and I still eat a lot of Cheetos when I write my briefs at night." And so I think just kind of recognize, it's a good thing to recognize what is that habit that's gone with you all along, or what's your self-reward, and what would it be like to have to undo that. So this column allows us to look at what we might be worried about if we did the opposite of that thing that was getting in our way.
Okay.
If we did the thing that didn't get in our way, what would we be worried about? So to share with you how this became more useful for me, I was trying to become a better communicator. I was not sending out a weekly email. And I was not getting up in front of the staff on a regular basis to share my thoughts of leadership. And at first, I was worried that I was too busy doing other things. There was a practical aspect of it. And then I was worried that I would be basically too headstrong, that I would come off in a way that was unappealing to others and other people would reject me if I really shared my beliefs about growth and development and how we can be better care providers really as a group. And so when I began to realize that, which of course I don't actually believe if I think about it consciously, but I realized, oh my gosh, I'm actually worried about the very thing that I want to be doing. And so, of course, I haven't been doing that thing on my list for 2 years, but it's not just because I don't have enough time and I'm taking care of patients. It's also because, unbeknownst to my own self, I'm kind of worried about how that would go. And until I realize that, then that thing is always going to be on my list, but it's never going to come off the list because I'm unaware that I'm keeping it on the list to protect myself from this potential discomfort. So same thing with snacking or choosing to say like, oh gosh, I realized I was going to think of myself as a bad mom if I didn't operate the household this way, or I'm going to think of myself as not a good caregiver for my spouse who's in need if I take a walk for 30 minutes after we eat because they can't go for the walk for 30 minutes. So it's really good things we're committed to. We're committed to being with those other people that we care about, or we're committed to having positive relationships. And then we can unwittingly connect those things in our mind and always choose what we unconsciously think of is good for that aspect of our life. And then we don't realize it's also getting in the way at the same time of another benefit to us. So after we go through those worry boxes, we look, this is kind of 3B, part 3B, is to say, well, what is our assumption about that worry? Or what is our assumption the whole time? Like, I assume that I would be seen as a bad parent if I'm not buying the right snacks. And so we then see what our competing commitment is. We're committed to being seen as being a good mom, or we're committed to being unendingly available to X, Y, or Z family member. Or we're, in my case, I'm committed to always listening and not charging ahead, or something that is a positive, but it's showing us why we are not doing all those good things we could think of in column 2.
Okay. And what's column 4?
Okay, and column 4 is the big assumption. And so I said assumption earlier in the chat, but we then realize, oh, okay, what is this big assumption I feel that we are trying to do so that we don't feel the dread that we would feel if we had to change something in our life, or if it would have we're trying to avoid something that would have a seemingly bad conclusion for me. So we take the popcorn example. I am not buying the healthy snacks. Why am I not buying the healthy snacks? Because I would be seen as being a bad parent or not a cool parent if I didn't buy these healthy snacks. And so I am protecting myself from the risk of not being a cool parent. And what is my big assumption is that cool parents buy unhealthy snacks. And therefore, I'm constantly going to try to fulfill that goal of that unconscious goal. And that begins to help me look a little differently on my popcorn, because I've never thought about being a cool parent and popcorn at the same time, or shopping. You're going to shop differently because I'm looking a little bit differently at the reasoning behind why my habits have not changed.
Now, is there ever just like, I like popcorn? Like, I just like it, or I'm lazy and I don't want to do my exercises tonight. I just want to go to bed. Like, maybe there's nothing complicated about that. I just don't like it. Or
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's just going to be that simple, right? I just didn't want to do it today. That was it. That's the end of it. But if it becomes a pattern that's getting in your way, where every single night for years, I have just wanted to blah, 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 then we might want to look at that for a deeper meaning.
Awesome. Okay, so those are the 4 columns. And did we interrupt you before you did the 5? You were going to start with the 5 tenets before the 4 columns, or did we kind of cover all?
I think we kind of got to there. So then what the next step is really in this methodology is to design a very tiny experiment to try something new and learn from that something new. And so in this example, which I like because it's kind of discrete, my goal is to eat something different after dinner. I've developed an insight about it. I'm either going to eat something different or not eat anything after dinner. And so I might design a tiny experiment for 5 days and learn something from the tiny experiment and see if that makes me look differently at this whole sequence that I've just developed. So could either of you think of 2 tiny experiments, maybe one on the, well, just come with whatever comes to your mind, that might be small enough, bite-sized enough that you could do it.
Okay, not going to buy popcorn ice cream for a week. I'm going to put out carrot sticks and hummus.
Exactly. So I'll try 5 days of an alternative healthy snack. Yeah. That'd be one thing.
I was going to say that I just set aside that time to just interact with my son if I'm thinking about being the parent, and right, and so maybe you're just on some level craving that interaction, right? That or maybe you give your son the popcorn, right? And kind of approach it from that side. I don't know.
Exactly. So those kinds of experiments, and I'll take that example, I think, because it could lead to an interesting place. But let's say you take either one of those examples, and the short structure is you do that for several days, take some actual notes about it. What did I learn from serving carrots and hummus? Well, I learned that carrots and hummus are also good, or I learned that I'm tired of carrots and hummus, or I learned that actually I wasn't even hungry at all because all I really wanted was popcorn, or because I was being unconscious. That's one way that could go. And I think, Allie, what you're saying is if you then realize actually you maybe have a deeper goal. So I'm worried that I'm not going to be a cool parent. That's why I'm having these snacks. Then I realize my biggest goal is actually to connect with my teenager or whoever it is. And so then maybe the experiment is related to connecting with the teenager. And the big insight that can happen here is, for example, in theory, what I recognize, I'm doing this thing to understand why I haven't changed my snacking pattern. What's really, really important to me is connecting with my high school senior before he is gone for college. And then that becomes something conscious to me that I hadn't realized before at all. I mean, maybe it's kind of in the back of my mind, but I haven't brought it to my very conscious attention. And then I realize, oh my gosh, I want to get better at something different. What I want to get better at is talking to my kid about something for at least 2 minutes after dinner, and so that changes the whole map. And maybe what you thought of as a snacking goal, in fact, what's really eating at your heart is something either slightly or very different. And then you can begin to see what you really need to feed your soul. And by feeding your soul, you're going to be in a better place to be making decisions that are healthy for your relationships. But maybe that's better for your eating habits as well. Or maybe, in fact, that's the place you actually needed the most work. And that if your relationships were in a better place, you wouldn't be as likely to have the eating habits that you have. And so then you might just let go of the eating habits for a while and focus on your relationships. And so the insight development can help us change our orientation and highlight the meaningful stuff that's really steering us in a direction and could really make us feel freed up if we got to it.
I think that is so powerful, right? And so there's something in going through those steps, right, that just has the feel of taking the time to really define it. And there's so many things in our life I think we would really like to do that for, but we haven't, right? Because I think this is a heavy lift, right, to look at it in these terms. I think the flip side to that is you're making it seem like it could really be executed in a really kind of easier, lighter way.
Right. And you don't, people are going to bite off whatever level they want of this. And it took me 5 times and work with some of my other staff members and just some other changes that were happening outside of my life to get a little bit deeper into that question. It was useful every single time. There was a useful aspect of it. It was definitely helping me build my own insights, help me see how I was limiting myself. And every time all along the way, it was useful. But it was differently personal at, when I did it a little longer with different groups and different changes had happened in my outside life that gave me a different ability to reflect on it. One little story I'll just say about, to piggyback off of what we were talking about, how you could say, well, really, actually, what's meaningful to me is this relationship. I wanted to work with a patient she was probably one of your patients if she lived in Boston. She has atrial fibrillation and chronic lymphedema and was wanting to work on how do I, have better movement and eating habits. And she realized actually all along she's been really, really wanting to interview some family members and write a book. And what was most important and interesting to her was really that story. And that's where we went with that conversation for a long time, is I think that's going to pull her towards something that feels really exciting and fulfilling. And when we feel a little bit more fulfilled, we probably will be able to make better choices about everything, whether that's eating or sleeping or communicating with others or whatever it is that can help kind of create the foundation of our health.
Can you tell us a little how you got to that with her? How long did it take you and how resistant was she to seeing that connection?
She was not resistant at all. Actually, it was kind of surprising, but I said, well, do you want to do a little bit of insight building work about, I think it was about dieting. It might've been about movement, but she said, sure. And we started working on it. And she was listening just to understand what she wanted to get better at, a bunch of ideas about what she wanted to get better at. And then it turned out that basically she was staying up too late and sleeping really late. And that was a problem. And it was hard for her to make good choices when she wasn't sleeping well. Well, why wasn't she sleeping well? Well, because she really, really wanted to be writing a book, and she still had a job. So she was doing a job during the day and then working on writing, or the idea of writing, even not in an organized way. Nothing was really going well at that point. And then she began to realize she was so committed to the idea of this thing that's kind of what she was up thinking about. And then when she decided, oh, okay, this can be consciously the thing I'm thinking about. I'm going to actively choose what I'm going to do with that. She began just, week after week, month after month, to shift little things that would help her get to that goal. Even making it conscious to her, why was this so important to her? What was it about these family members, some of whom had passed away, some of whom were on the verge of passing away? What was important about her life? And when she began to name those things, she began to say, oh gosh, I really want to get going on this. It was not the place I expected to go when we were working on healthy lifestyle.
Interesting.
So how, I feel like there's this intersection too with you thinking about your own goals and why you're not achieving them. And like kind of very close to that, but different, is acknowledging that things you're doing, you're not, let me rephrase this, you're not defining a goal that maybe you're expected to, right? So kind of like the negative of this, right? Is there room, right, to explore that? Like, my family tells me I should do this, right? My doctor tells me I should do this, and I don't want to do this, which is the kind of the negative, right, of what you said. You said pick something that was active. Is it more complicated to explore that way, or is it possible to?
Well, I think the invitation is to explore your response to what my family says I should and what my doctor says I should.
Yeah.
But really what I yearn for is, and then what is it that you yearn for? And maybe there's to start with whatever is really truly coming from that person's internal set of desires is going to have a lot more oomph behind it than what anyone else said.
Mm-hmm. I think I have to go through like kind of these tangible steps a few more times and play with this, right? Because it seems like there will be a learning curve to asking these questions.
It's such a learning curve. Yeah, that's been really interesting itself. And maybe I think why it took me a while to get to something more meaningful with my own work was that I misunderstood a little bit the structure that I was supposed to be putting my questions into. And I took a class about being a facilitator because I wanted to really do this work with patients, and I wanted to better understand how the structure would work. And I wanted to then also be able to use this with our own staff. And we have slowly moved in the direction of learning more and more about it ourselves. But it wasn't until I spent the time learning as a facilitator that I realized, oh, I actually kind of misunderstood a little bit of how I was supposed to group those things.
So maybe you could just restate again. I think somebody is typing that in too, but that would help me as well to just go through those.
Sure. Yeah. So
Write them down while you do it. And just for the audience, we'll put this in the email that follows the webinar, but I'll type it as you talk.
Sure. And I'll send you to post a little bit of a summary, but number one is whatever is the improvement goal. And so that's something that we want to be true for you, that implicates you alone. So for example, here's an example of why that didn't work. I wanted to have my team communicate more during meetings. Well, I can't commit to my team communicating more. I have to commit to learning how to be a better facilitator of meetings, because the onus of responsibility has to be in yourself. And it's stated in the affirmative, like we worked on. It's not that I want to stop eating popcorn, it's that I want to get better at being more mindful. I want to get better at choosing more healthy food. And there has to be room for improvement. If you're the greatest ace, then pick something else. And it really has to be important to you. So if it's very low on your list, if your doctor says lose weight and you're like, oh, lose weight. I have so many other things on my plate. Pick something else that's on your plate that really is meaningful to you. that's number one, is the improvement goal. Number two is, what are you doing that is getting in the way of that goal? And what are you not doing that is getting in the way of the goal? The key is getting in the way of. What are you doing and not doing that's getting in the way of your improvement goal? Number three has two parts. One is, what are you worried about? So if you reversed all those things that you're not doing, or or doing that are getting in the way, what would that feel like? And then take another stab at that. Really, what would it feel like? Keep asking yourself, okay, like you said, Allison, it's, you might think it's getting in the way of my relationship with my kid. And what I'm really afraid of is that I'll be a bad parent, for example. And then 3B is, what do we then see as our competing commitment? Our commitment is we want to be a good mom, or our commitment is we want to be constantly moving because we have so many responsibilities, or something like that. So what are we committed to that is not a noble goal, like I'm committed to, solving all problems for my family, therefore I can never let go. It has to be something that that helps you see what you're worried about, helps you see what are you committed to, and that's why you were worried in the first place. It's usually a good thing, like we're committed to being good doctors or being good parents. And then the fourth column is, then once you look at the whole thing together, what do you realize was your assumption? And usually this assumption has a limiting or a bad conclusion for you about your own self. And it's what you realize was making the bad thing in column 3 necessary. So I'm committed to, my big assumption is if I'm not providing a diverse group of snacks, I will not have a good relationship with my kid. And so my big assumption is that a good parent has a diverse group of snacks for kids, and that's what it means to be a good mom. And then we try to, that's the fourth column, and then we try to just design a very tiny experiment, get a little tiny bit of data, and make the experiment small, like really, really discrete, nothing that you can't handle in a couple days. And then just reflect back and start over with the model and see if, in fact, quite often what happens is you realize, oh, I need to ask a different question, actually.
Yeah.
Well, this is so well timed, right? This time of the year, because I know I'm like thinking about all my New Year's resolutions and how I can really put this into action, right? Because I think tied up with those resolutions are the habits and our goals for this year, right? And to just think about it through these different lenses. It also almost celebrates kind of failure, right? Because you're really asked to kind of really define what hasn't been working, which to me, that to get that far and really define that seems like, such a win, right? But
right, because failure might be success in another lens. I actually am really successful at connecting with my kid, and I'm worried about undoing that.
Yeah, that recognition piece, right? So this exercise has a little bit of that kind of mindfulness, self-reflective feel to it, right? But with steps that feel very actionable. So I think this is going to be fun to try.
I'm going to read a comment in the chat here, Natasha, and see if you have anything to say about this. So somebody writes, reminds me of generative planning. You can't just say, how do I get to the entire goal? If I need to go across a large area and the first thing is a big hill, you ask, how do I climb the hill? Because from there, I'll be able to see what's next and build more of the plan. sort of a incremental also approach to the measurable, incremental, actionable approach instead of biting off the whole problem, perhaps.
Right. Look at what you really, really need. And what you really, really need might be much, much different at each step of that, getting across a big field.
But maybe seeing the whole thing at first, and then, get to here and then looking around and see what to do next, and then get to there and see what to do next, rather than it can be overwhelming to say, like, I need to get from point A to point B. I'm just not going to try because it's impossible. But can you get from A to 8.1 and 8.2 and take each piece of it as it comes?
Yeah. So useful with physical movement, I think, too. Like,
yes.
It doesn't have to be that I'm going and exercising every day. I just need to stand up and walk around and stretch. And that's a good start a lot of times.
Yes.
Or put your gym shoes where they're visible, right? Or, just break it down into simpler, actions. So I like the positive feel this has, right? From instead of feeling overwhelmed by big problems, right? To really try to narrow it, right? So that it's something that also you can really dissect thoroughly, right? And then maybe gain a little insight into the kind of more complex problems. Mm-hmm. You opened that with that, Natasha, and I wanted to ask you about that because you opened with something about complexity and that we all want to change. And I'm just wondering, maybe this is a good time for you to just say that again.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'll go back to that. So these researchers have identified 4 stages of cognitive development in terms of complexity of thought. So once we're 25 and our brains are fully formed and even our frontal cortex is fully formed at 25 and we're supposed to be capable of making kind of more thoughtful, considerate decisions, we still may be thinking in a more binary type of a way. This is better than that, or I do this because of that. And that along the levels of complexity, on the first level, even very educated people may be seeing things as very binary. For example, they, do this because we're asked to do it and we do it. And then the next level of thought is we do this because we're asked to do it and we can see the benefit of it. And then on a third level is there's a group relatedness to why I do what I do. And on the fourth level, which is more like on the Gandhi level, there's a universal implication for why I do what I do. And I can hold that recognition in mind while I make my specific decision on a day-to-day level. So despite our level of education, we actually could be at any one of those levels of cognitive complexity in how we consider our decisions. And that by doing this work, by doing this insight building work and recognizing what our competing commitments are and what our hidden assumptions are that we're not seeing ourselves, we grow in our ability to hold those complex ideas and the complex needs of ourselves and others. And this is an exercise that kind of gets us further and further along in our ability to have complex thought and see real problems completely.
What I love about this is that you can oversimplify it. I understand that today we totally oversimplified it, talking about popcorn, and in an hour we can kind of sum it all up. But clearly there's a way to do this that takes many, many hours. Books have been written. There's a couple of websites that you're going to share with us. So for people who want to go much deeper than we went today, to really explore, and some things are probably much more deeply hidden or rooted in childhood experiences or other things that might take a little more time and effort and more support to work on. There's ways to take this even much, much further. So just as you say, the complexity we've only scratched the surface, I think, of all the things the places this could take us.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of easy ways to jump in. If you just want to read something at the library, there's a few books I'd read by these authors. One is called Immunity to Change. And that's their words for understanding why we resist things is actually because we're committed to others. And in their words, we're kind of trying to change our immune system to get ourselves more open to these things that we resist or we are immune to. And on the personal level of personal behavior change, one of the authors actually lost quite a lot of weight by doing the work himself about his own weight needs. He needed to lose, I don't know, many pounds. And his coworkers challenged him. They said, look, if you do your own immunity work on this, you're going to find out something that you don't realize. So that's Right Weight, Right Mind by Robert Keegan. And you can Google these guys. There's two companies right in Boston, but of course they're available globally. They work globally with individuals and groups. And you can just join for a couple $100 to do a session if you want to have a little bit more feedback and interpersonal guidance. One group is called the Developmental Sprint. I've done this myself many times. And the Developmental Sprint group welcomes people from all around the world. They have workshops that last a month, and then they're basically like an 8-hour commitment in any month, many different time zones. And it walks us through the model, pairs you with a few people from around the world so that you're working in a small group of 3 or 4 people. And really in an 8-hour commitment throughout the course of a month, you can learn quite a lot about how the structure works and how the experiment works. And the other company is called Minds at Work, like improving your mind. And that is another company that has different models of doing the same work, a little bit more coaching. There's some models that take a little bit more time, I think, in that group. And both of them have been really, really useful to me in learning about the work. What's really exciting to me about it is that it is not, it's coaching, but it's not coaching that you have to do at the $500 an hour executive coach level. You can do this yourself. You can do it in a group with others, maybe for $25 an hour or something that's a little bit more bite size. And ultimately in groups, it's teachable. So we can learn this work and then work on it with each other so that we're not really dependent on an outside facilitator to keep this insight building, as long as we have other people that can help us reflect on how we're using the model and how we can get better.
Wow, I love that you've used this with your staff and with your patients and with yourself. It sounds like you could really apply it to a lot of different things.
It's very applicable to so many aspects of our lives.
Well, gosh, I guess we've come to the end of our hour. So I want to thank you so much for introducing us to this concept. And we'll send, as I said in the chat, an email with these websites and the books that you were talking about if people want to dive further. I definitely want to find out more about this. I have a feeling there's a lot that I could do with myself and my patients as well. So thank you. And I will wrap up by saying next month, February 6th, is actually your partner. Again, we've got 2 Northern Virginia family practice superstars in a row. And Dr. Cecily Habert, we're going to go from the big abstract complexity today to upper respiratory infections on February 6th, all the viruses that are going around, how to recognize which one it is, how to best approach it, treat it, when antibiotics are useful, when they're not, et cetera. So a super bird's eye view down to something very concrete. So I hope to see you all on February 6th. And Natasha, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, both of you. It's really, really fun to talk to you at all times. Sometime I can't wait to see your office in person. And thanks a lot for
Yeah,
having
we
me.
look forward to that. Yeah. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.